Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for attending this session. I think that is very early for someone. I don't know in USA what is the time right now, but thank you so much for your time. That is very important for us. So how to get the most from Azure SQL Database and managed instance? The main idea is to perform a role play, okay, between a CEO and DBA, okay, about the main things, the main questions that we have every day in support. You know that we are support engineers. We have this conversation every time. So the main idea it's that I would like to share with you is the experience that we have in these conversations. Okay, so for the reason, we are going to change our roles. Right now, I am my name is Jose Manuel Jurados. I am the CEO of Contoso Company, where my main concern in my company is to pay less, okay? And also to achieve more. So I would like to have the most benefit for my company, okay? Do you have the details of contact here? Okay, and with me is my colleague, Thamires.
My name is Thamires Lemes, and I am a DBA consultant developer for Contoso. And my goal is to have an easy life, and to achieve that is to find a balance with the goals of my CIO, and also to have a better AJ for our environment.
Okay, so right now, Thamires, you are the DBA, the consultant, and developer. So you have 3 roles in the company, right? Oh, wow.
Yes.
You need to earn a lot of money in my company, right?
Well, you pay me well.
Okay. This is the most important thing. This is the most important thing. Okay. So, Thamires, I have, you know that the most important thing for me or for my company is to reduce the cost. Okay. So, but I would like to still keep in the same performance. What is the options that we have, or do you suggest in order to reduce the cost in Azure SQL Database?
Well, I've been researching about this on how we can reduce the cost of our databases, and there is mainly 3 options. The first one is the read scale out. This will allow us to move some of our reporting workloads to use the replicas databases. So we have the semi-computing resources at no extra cost, and we can divide the workload and consume less resources and maybe even lower the service tier. The other option is scalability. And with this option, we can scale our database up when more resources are needed and scale down when they are not needed anymore. So we can be built for the extra resources just for the time in which we need them. The third option for the databases that we do not need to use all the time is to move them to serverless. So we are only built for the time they are active. They auto pause if there are no connections. So these are the mainly options I thought.
Okay, could you please explain some with more details about it? Because I'm very interested about, because if I understood correctly, I would like, please give me more details about it, please.
Okay, the read scale out is available for premium business critical and hyperscale service tier. As I mentioned, there are no extra cost. You have 3 replicas that uses our own technology to replicate. One of these replicas is the primary replica. And if you change your connection string to have application intent read only, we will connect to the primary replica. This way, we can change our reporting to have this connection string and reduce the workload in our primary database.
So at the end, if I understood well, right now we could have 2 servers. One for the main workload that we have, another one is for reporting. Right?
Yes, with the same size, with the same computing power.
I like this idea, because at the end, the most important thing for me is extra cost. So okay, it's great. Okay.
The thing we have noticed while testing this feature is that if you go to the Azure portal, we'll see the resources consumptions and queries to be the same for the primary and for the replica. This is because the query data store is replicated. So to see information about the resources consumption and query executions on the replica, we need to use the DMVs. Also, SQL Profiler and Audit features are not supported.
Okay.
As mentioned, another possibility would be to scale our databases when more resources are needed. So we can go to basic or general purpose, to premium or business critical. The scale operation is fast. It has minimum downtime. We can also change the hardware generation. And we can scale out using charging, meaning that we can have multiple databases to distribute the data. Also, for the database in which we need more space, more than 8 terabytes, for example, we can have it in Hyperscale service tier. Hyperscale allows us to have up to 100 terabytes of data.
Okay. So if I understood well, the main idea is I could change my database. So I cannot wait to let's say, to build a new or to create or to develop a new machine. Just only go to the portal, change the capacity of my server, and that's it. So if I need, for example, I don't remember exactly, the last time was Black Friday. So when we need the maximum capacity, we could change the without using the portal, change the database tier from basic, let's say, to P15 or to use business critical, right?
Yes, and we can try to predict more or less the amount of resources that that we will need based on the previous experiences. But if during Black Friday, those resources turns out to not be enough, we can scale up even further without with minimum downtime. So since we have the retry logic implemented in our applications, the customers will probably not even notice.
I like this idea because also I could save my the money. For example, we could change the database tier from 9 to 6, and after it we could change to scale down the server, right? So it's a way to save our money, right?
Yes, you could even automate these operations. So you can scale up during certain times of the day, for example, if there more load is needed, and then scale down when it's not needed anymore. So you only pay for the extra computing power during a certain period.
Okay, great.
As mentioned, there are different hardware generations. Gen 4 is an old version or old generation that's only available for database that were provisioned a few time ago. So it's not available for new ones. The new ones come with Gen 5 by default. This is the hardware generation for most workloads. However, if you need more computing power and you need more CPU, you can go to FSP2 series. Or if you need more memory, you can use M series. M series can provision up to 3.7 terabytes of memory.
Wow.
Which is a lot.
Wow. So, wow.
There is also another option with the C series that's mainly for to improve security, improve the execution of, for example, encrypted data, of operations in encrypted data.
I have a question, sorry. So that's mean that what happen if, so it's possible to scale down one day and scale down after. So it's possible to change the database tier depending on my needs, or once I scale up, there is not possible to go back to previous ones?
You can scale up and down as needed.
Okay, great.
The only service tier you cannot move to another service tier is Hyperscale, because it's a different technology.
Okay.
Okay, so about the serverless, if there is no connections to the database, it can auto pauses. You configure the time that without connections until it auto pauses. So you are not charged for that time. You can also set up a min vCore and max vCore. So the number of vCores actively being used by the application, by the database, will stay between those two values. So depending on the workload, more vCores may be allocated or deallocated.
Okay, so we have two main options in serverless, right? So one thing is, if the database is inactive, for example, I don't have any connection in my database, you are going, or Microsoft will post this database immediately, let's say. And during this time, until receive a new connection, I'm not going to receive any charge about this database, right? If I understood well, right?
Yeah, but you will not be charged by the computing, or should be charged by the storage the database uses.
Okay.
But there is a big difference between those two charges.
Yeah.
So we can save a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay, so something that's important to mention is that once the database pauses, the first connections will be slower because it has to activate the database. We may even receive some connection errors, but with the retry logic, we can make it transparent for our end users. It's charged per second, and it, as mentioned, it will automatically improve the performance by adding the cores if needed. Okay, I'm going to show how to create a serverless database. So if you go to the SQL Server and you go to create database, you have here the compute plus storage. You click configure, and on general purpose, it's only available on general purpose. You can select serverless. So in serverless, you can configure the max vCores and the min vCores, and also the auto pause delay. The auto pause is from 1 hour to 7 days. Once you select everything, you just click apply and put the database name and so on.
This is the inactive period. So it's when SQL or Microsoft consider to pause the database, right? The auto pause delay.
Yeah, the auto pause delay is when the database is inactive for this amount of time, it will auto pause.
Okay. And
But
other question.
by
Go ahead, please.
inactive, I mean no connections. So if there are connections, this can prevent the database from pausing.
Okay. Other question I have is, what does mean by max vCores?
It's the maximum number of vCores that will be assigned to this database. So it will start with the minimum vCores, and if needed, if the workload is higher, then it can allocate up to the number of maximum vCores. So
this I don't need to do anything. Just only if the SQL detect that I need to increase the number of vCore, this process will be automatically performed by.
Yes, this is automatically.
I like this idea.
One other thing that I think it's important to mention is that serverless is mostly useful or cost saving if the database gets paused. But for example, if you check the pricing page for Azure, you see that it has more or less this cost per hour. So if you, this is per vCore. So for example, if you have 2 vCores and it stay active for 24 hours, 30 days, you have you will be charged by this amount for the computing. And if you go to the provisioned, you see that 2 vCores is more or less half the price. So if you have a serverless database, it does not pause. It can increase the cost actually. So we should make sure that we configure a database with serverless, it will get paused.
It's a good tip. It's a good tip. Thank you. Thank you. Because yes, it's very nice to know this. It's because yes, because we need to think about it in order to reduce the cost. But it's clear that much probably in some specific moment of the time, depending on the business, if in Europe, for example, in the night we are not going to use this database. Okay, so you know that we have a lot of customers. We have more than 15,000 customers using the same database, and I know that when I review the invoice, we receive a lot of we charge for a lot of money because we are using a business critical. And I received some complaints with the marketing people because when they create a copy of the data and they want to manage this data with a lot of customers that we have, they mentioned that they need to remove a lot of tables because it's not related with the customer data. They need to manage a lot of things. So do you have any way, let's say, to have databases per customers or any other way that is possible to split the data?
Yes, I have been included in some of the email threads. They are complaining about this. And through my research, I think their database is a good candidate for sharding. Right now, the database is single tenant, which means we have all the data in a single database, but we could change it to multi-tenant. So we could divide the clients for different databases. For example, for a big customer, we could have in one single database, and we could have 3 customers in another database or 2. This way, we can also scale up or scale down the different databases according to the workload for that customer. So we could have database one in basic, one in standard, one in premium, for example.
Okay. So at the end, I like this idea. So at the end, so instead to have a big database that we have all the customer there, so the idea is to create different databases per customers.
Yes, we can divide it based on the way that the marketing people query the data. So we can try to make sure that it only needs to read from a single database, and we can improve the performance and also reduce the cost because we would not need as much resources for a single database.
But do we need to perform any modifications in our code?
Yes, first we could use the split merge tool to move some data related to a specific customer to another database. For example, we could, as needed, create another database and move a customer to that one if it starts to get too big. And on the application, there is some changes to be done. It needs to use the Elastic Database Client Library, so it can communicate with a chart map manager. And this chart map manager is a database that will provide information to the client application about where the data it needs is located. So it might be in one database or multiple databases. So for the client app, if it's using the Elastic Database Client Library, it will be automatically redirected to the correct database.
Okay. Okay, so right now we have, you know, that we are reaching the limit of 8 terabytes of data. So, and I would like to know if we have any solution about the size, if we thought, let's say, compress the data and compromise the performance. Do you have any solution about the hyperscale? About this situation, because most probably we are going to reach the 8 terabytes of data.
Yes, this is a concern I have as well, because I have seen that this database is growing very fast. So the best solution, the only solution to have more than this 8 terabytes of data in a single database is to move it to the Hyperscale service tier. Hyperscale can have up to 100 terabytes of data. And we have a primary compute and 2 secondary computes. This communicates with page servers to retrieve data or write, because given the amount of data, to have good performance, we have the page servers to retrieve or write to the storage. This is a completely different technology of what we have in the other service tiers.
Yes, sorry, could you please go back, because
Yeah.
what does mean page servers? Because you know that in SQL Server we access directly to the data. So what does mean page servers?
With page server, you do not access that data directly. You make requests to the page server, and the page server will access the data file.
Okay.
This is to achieve a good performance, although the high amount of data.
So at the end, so the idea is every page server will contain, let's say, every data file that we have in Hyperscale.
Yes.
Okay. So in the end, for the reason we have the huge performance, right? Because in the end, every page server, we have the file that we are using, right? In order to have more performance, etc., right?
Yes, and also just as highlight, the database can get very big, up to 100 terabytes. So backup and restore could be an issue, but in this service tier, it's done through a snapshot. So the backups and the restores are very fast as well.
So I like this idea, because in the end, we are managing, let's say, using the buffer pool extension, we are going to manage this type of things about it. I like this idea. For the reason is one thing that you mentioned previously, that is not possible. Once we are changed to database tier in Hyperscale, that is not possible to go back to another database tier, right?
Yes, because it's completely different technology in regards to the way it handles the I/O due to the size of the databases.
Okay. I think that most probably is a good idea also for our data warehouse, for example. You know that we have Synapse, but sometimes also we have Hyperscale. In Hyperscale, we could increase our data warehouse because we could have more than 100 terabytes of data, right? So
Yes.
I like this idea for another system that we have. Okay, thank you so much. I like this one. Also, sorry, the last question is the log service. So at the end, the data and the log, we are going to have the same situation, the same page servers, right?
Yes, exactly. Because the log is also going to be a little bit big because of the size of the data.
Okay, okay, great.
Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to create an Hyperscale, meaning what are the options we have when configuring it. So if you go to the server and create database, and you change the compute and storage, you can select Hyperscale. There is a warning here that says that you cannot move from Hyperscale to another service tier if you need to change the service tier, you have to use a backpack file. So you have to mark that you understand that. For all number of vCores, even if you start with the minimum 2 vCores, you already have the 100 terabytes as the maximum data storage. So for the database, for example, that needs a lot of space but doesn't need a lot of computing, you could have 2 vCores. You can also select the number of secondary replicas. As mentioned previously, we could have reporting running on the replica. So we could make use of the read scale out on the Hyperscale service tier.
So at the end, we could connect to the always on environment, because at the end it's always on environment, right? Because that we have behind the scenes, right?
Yes, we just need to change the connection string to application intent read only, and we are able to connect to the primary replica.
So at the end, we have 2 servers. One is the normal server that we are going to connect. Another one will be the replica, right? Okay.
Yes.
So we are able to connect we are able to connect to all the replicas, or just only one replica all the time?
Just one replica.
Okay. Okay. It's in round robin. Okay.
Just
Perfect.
a primary replica.
Okay. Okay. Great. Great to know. So we have 2 servers with the maximum capability is 100 terabytes of data. Great. Okay. Perfect.
Yes. Okay. So.
Okay. So I have other concerns about the Highability, Thamires, because you know that yesterday we need to report something happened in the data center. I would like if you could please explain me what is the option that we have about the Highability, because we have many problems, and I would like to distinguish what is, for technical point of view, also about the different options that we have Highability. Could you please explain what is the options that we have?
Well, we have mainly 3 options. The first one is on redundant. This will allow us to have the database replicated to different zones. So with different cooling systems and network, in case of a disaster, it will automatically fail over to the other zone. So as we have the retry logic, it will most probably be transparent to our end users. We also have the active georeplication. In georeplication, we can have a database replicated to another region. But in case of a disaster, we have to manually fail over the database to the other region. And it's going to be necessary to change the connection string of the application to connect to the other region. So meaning that we'll have someone to log in and make all these changes. Another option is failover group. This also uses georeplication for replicating the data, but provides us endpoints to connect both to the primary and the secondary. So we do not need to change the connection string in case of a failover. And also the failover is done automatically. So we may not even notice the failover was done until we check our database.
I have a question. You mentioned one thing that is very important. You mentioned several times retry logic. What does mean this? Because it's my first time that I heard this concept.
Yeah, we have this implemented in our applications. Retry logic is a best practice for Azure SQL because we have, and also managed instance, because the patching is handled by Microsoft, and we may have few periods of unavailability. With retry logic, if we receive an error, we retry the operation. So it may be transparent for the application.
So if I don't have this option in my application, for example, because I established the typical application that just only starting the application, we open the connection and we close the connection at the end, or when I close the application. So in this situation, we need to modify some codes, right? in this situation?
Yeah, well, we should always have the retry logic implemented.
Okay.
For Azure.
Okay.
Okay, so the zone redundant is for premium business critical. We have also it in preview in general purpose. We have 3 secondary replicas in different zones. So if there is an issue in the current zone, it will fail over automatically. There is no need to change anything in the application. The connection string is still the same. So it's maybe transparent.
Okay. What does mean zones for
It's different cooling system, network. So it also has a separate disk. So if there is a disaster in one of those things, it failovers to a zone that's working fine.
Okay. Okay. So we are going to have 3 different machines in different 3 zones with a different.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's great to know, because in terms of Highability, yeah, disaster recovery is a good idea to have this. Yeah.
As mentioned, this is available for premium business critical at no extra cost. In preview in general purpose, there is an extra cost for general purpose. There is no need to change connection string or application logic, but we should test our workload for latency, because there is a distance between the zones. So we may have more latency from the application, network latency, when connected to a different zone. So we should make sure that it works well and the response time is still good. It's not available in all regions, so we need to check for the database that we want to enable this feature, that it's available for this zone, the region of the database.
In technical point of view, what does mean latency? Because you mentioned that the latency from premium and business critical is higher. So if I understood well, we have different 3 zones. What does mean latency?
It's not that it's higher for premium and business critical, but if we fail over to a different zone, we may have higher latency. Latency means, in this case, it's network latency. It means the time it takes to receive an answer through the network. So there is physical distance between the zones, and the latency might be different. So that's why we should test it, as it may increase the execution time of our queries.
Okay,
We can manually failover using the zone redundant. Using PowerShell, we can failover to a different region. So once we enable it, we should test the connections from the application to the other zone and also measure the latency.
Okay, yes, because most probably in the always on environment, when we modified something in the primary, until we receive the confirmation from the secondary, most probably, depending on the distance that we have between zones, right? We have to wait more time, right?
Yes,
This is
exactly.
okay, understood. Okay.
Okay, Georeplication is available in all regions, all service tiers. We can have up to 4 readable secondary replicas, and these 4 readable secondary replicas can have each one more 4 replicas, and this is the limit. So we can have up to 20 replicas for a single database. It's replication to another region, to any other region. And the failover is not automatic, it's manual. So
the main option that we have with Georeplication is, if we have modified, so we have several copy of the data in different zones, let's say United States, United Kingdom, or Spain, or Madrid, etc., right?
Yes. So for example, if we have an application in a different region that only performs read operations, it could connect to the replica in the same region. thus having less latency in the communication, as we have mentioned, and it may increase the execution time of the queries.
Okay, so and the end we have 16 copies. So at the end you mentioned that for the minimum it's 4 in the portal, right? For replicas. You mentioned that using PowerShell we could have another 4 replicas. So at the end we could have 16, right? 16 copies of the data around the globe, right?
Yeah, you could have 16 at this level plus 4 on this. So you could have up to 20 replicas.
Wow.
Each one could be in a different region, for example.
Okay.
And the last option mentioned is the failover group. With the failover group, we have just 2 regions. And it uses Georeplication as well, but the failover is automatic and transparent to the application because we have endpoints. So we have 2 endpoints. One is for the read-write operations to the primary database, and the other one is for read-only to our reporting, for example, and this connects to the primary replica. So if there is a disaster and we have the endpoints in our connection string, there is no need to change anything in the application. Important to mention, you can only, with failover, you can only have one other region.
Okay, I have a question for you because so right now it's always on environment. It's clear because about the failover groups, we have a unique endpoint, etc. But what happens if I specify in the failover group, in the primary, that's the failover group database of Windows.net, and I use in the connection string application intents equal read only. We are going to move directly to the secondary server, or what happened in this situation? Because I'm very interested if automatically Azure will enroute the connection to the secondary server.
So if you are on Hyperscale or business critical or premium service tiers, you have the 2 servers, and each one of these 2 servers have the read-only replicas. So you could connect to the database itself, the primary in the zone, or to the replica. So if you specify application intent read only in the connection string, you can reach other 2 servers with the same computing. So you can have 4, also using the endpoints.
Well, so at the end, so if I combine the Redscale, so at the end, I'm going to, if I specify it, this database of Windows.net and I use application intent, I'm going to connect to the replica that we have in the data center, not to the read-only of the failover group, right?
Yes, the primary has a replica and the secondary also has a replica. So we can use the 4 servers.
And without cost, right? So I don't need to pay more extra. So we have 3 servers at the same time at least, right?
Yeah, we have this server, the primary one, and its replica, and we have the secondary and its replica at no extra cost.
Okay, great, great. So in the end, I could have my server. Okay, thank you. No, it's fine. So okay, I like these ideas because in the end, for technical point of view, we have many things in order to automate our process and also to reduce the cost and also to have more resources than without paying. So I like it without extra codes. Okay, so other question I have for you. You know that yesterday I spent 1 hour to have all the information ready to have an important decision. I know that it's not because we are doing 10 million transactions per hour, but I saw that we are not using all the resources and the maintains window that we have in order to update the statistics, to recreate the missing indexes, etc. It's taking hours. Do we have any other options in SQL Azure that to improve the performance and reduce the maintenance window?
To help us turn the performance, we can enable the automatic tuning on our databases. With automatic tuning, it's possible to, for example, create indexes if the SQL Server finds that the query could be improved with an index, or drop an index if it's not being used, or even force a less good plan if it detects there is a plan regression. This could be configured to automatic, meaning these operations will be done automatic by SQL Server. Manual, that will show us in the portal the recommended, and we can decide whether to create the index, drop, or force the plan, or disabled if we don't want to use that. But the good thing about this is that it's the same algorithm that's used for the other customers from Microsoft. So it means that we are learning from others' experience as well. It has very low impact on the workload, and we can configure it for our server or even for each database differently. So we can have, depending on the need of the database, we can have different configurations. Also, in the portal, we can see the history of the automatic tuning to see what has been done. So the issue you mentioned with the performance was dual plan regression. So to avoid that, we could enable the force less good plan on the database.
I like this idea. So in the end, for plan integration, we could force the last good plan, right? So if I understand well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you please mention about the low impact? What does mean low impact? Because how SQL try to analyze this data about it? What does mean low impact in the workload?
It uses the query store. So it uses data that's already being stored for our databases to make the decision. And it does not causes a high impact on our performance.
For the reason, at least SQL needs to have some time in order to analyze this workload, in order to analyze this sort of things, as you mentioned before, right?
Yes, we may have a brief moment with in which the plan regression is active until SQL realizes it happened and then forces the plan, for example.
Okay. I like it, this idea. Okay, so at the end, I like it because we could improve the performance based on the automatic tuning, based on the query data store, based on multiple things, parameter sniffing, plan regression. Okay, great. Other option I have is, that yesterday we ran our security department, ran a penetration test in our server, and we saw many port opens. So I don't know what happened. We saw the port 1433, 3306 of MySQL, Postgres, and all of them are public. So could you please how we are going to remove everything and just only have access to my application, let's say?
Well, the connections to the SQL database are public by default. So one option we have to not have these public ports open is to use private link. With private link, we can have a fixed private IP within a VNet for the SQL database. It works across regions, subscription, and tenants, meaning that not only the connections are not only allowed from that specific VNet, but for period VNet, for example. It's important to mention that it's for inbound connections. So if you have a connection from the SQL to a storage account, for example, the connection will go through the public IP. So it's only for connections to SQL, not from SQL. But for us, it will reduce tremendously the number of public ports open.
Yeah. So I have a question for you about the public. You mentioned that it's public. So that's mean that other ones, it's able to connect to my server without user and password, or what
No,
that? Oh, okay.
no. The credentials is required at both configurations. So, and also when you're not using private endpoint, the connections pass through a firewall. So it has to be enabled on the SQL Server firewall, unless you mark the allow connections from Azure resources. This will allow connections for all Azure IPs, but credentials are required at all times.
Okay. So that means the private link will be just only for the connection for, as you mentioned about just only the VNet, the machine that we have in this VNet and subnets, right?
And the period VNets.
Okay. Okay. And also, what that's meaning in inbound connection? So could you please explain more about what is a inbound connection? So
Inbound connections, the connections to SQL.
to SQL. Okay.
Yeah, from SQL, the connections are still public.
Could you please give me some examples about it, because I don't understand what that's mean from SQL to another one.
For example, if you connect from the application to SQL using the private endpoint, then it's going to go through the private IP of SQL. If you use a storage account for inserting data, for example, in a SQL database, it will go through the public IP.
Okay, for example, bulk insert, right, or something, right?
Yes, or if you use Elastic Query to access a different SQL database, also go through the public IP. So any connection from SQL will not use the private link. To SQL, it may use if you configure it on the application VNet.
Okay. 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 So, wow, many things, many new things, and also in technical point of view, I like it. I like it, this idea. So I have last question for you, Thamires. I know. Sorry, it seems that is an like it's a we are in the with a conversation with a policeman and thief. What is the? I know that I received the invoice and I saw that you are using SQL managed instance, but I don't know why. Okay, so can you please explain, because I received the invoice is very high in this point for sure, and I'm going to fire you in the company, but I would like to know what is the reason that you did this test without asking me. What managed instance? Why managed instance?
We have three options to migrate to Azure. The first one is to use SQL Server on Azure VM, and for this would have to manage patching, upgrade. So we prefer to use PaaS service. As PaaS service, we have Azure SQL Managed Instance and Azure SQL Database. We chose Managed Instance because the application, the way it's configured now, needs to have cross-database transactions with a linked server. And linked server is not supported for Azure SQL Database. That's why we chose to use the managed instance.
Okay, so that's mean that if I want to move to the or SQL Server, because you know that we have right now many SQL servers in our data center, so that's mean that if I need to move the entire instance of SQL Server, I cannot move to SQL Server to SQL Database as a service. I need to move to managed instance. So depending of the options that I have, right?
Yes, it's because we use linked server. It's not supported in Azure SQL Database. It's only supported in SQL Server on Azure VMs and in Azure SQL Managed Instance. But we do not want to handle the patching ourselves. So we chose to use the managed instance. Not only the patching, but also it has automatic backups and it's managed by Microsoft. It's a PaaS service. So that's why we chose it.
So for the reason you mentioned previously about the Retry Logic, because when we are going to have this dispatching in PaaS services?
Yeah, usually it happens outside of the working hours for the region, but with the Retry Logic, the brief period in which there is an availability, do the patching, may be transparent for the application, for the end users.
Okay. Okay. So depending of also depending, so if understood well, depending on the needs or the migration that we are using, I need to choose one of these technologies, right? SQL VMs, managed instance, or SQL database, right? If understood well.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for attending this session. You know, it's the typical conversation that we have in support when we have cases in terms of advisory cases. You could see that many questions is coming to our minds every day about the different, from technical point of view. Also, I saw several comments about sales point of view. The main idea of this session is try to mix something, try to mix both. Is what is, for technical point of view, what is the best choice? As you could see, we saw many things. Okay, so my name is Jose Manuel Juarez. I'm an escalation engineer in Microsoft. You could have the details of contacts. I support many technologies. I'm working for Microsoft for more than 9 years. And also I'm a speaker in many events and WordPress Microsoft certified trainer. So Thamires.
My name is Thamires Lemes. I'm not a DBA consultant from Contoso. I also work at Microsoft. I've been in Microsoft for a little more than 1 year, but I have worked previously as a DBA for 11 years. The contact information is in this slide. And if you have any other questions that come to your mind later, you can reach out to us through email.
There
So
has actually been one question in the Q&A as well,
yes.
if you're willing to take that. So there is the question that, do you see the limit of 100 databases per managed instance as an issue?
Well, it's a very good question, right, Thamires? I like it. Yes, it's a limit. I'm sure that most probably this limit will be changed in the future. You have several options. Also, you have another thing that is called managed pools. Okay, you could have several, let's say, managed instance. Okay, and you could have another 100 databases per instance. So we have different approach. You could create some schema per customers. You could create different instance. Also, right now, for example, we have cross database queries or distribute transactional between two main servers. So for me, I don't see it's a huge, let's say, issue about this limit. Okay, so I saw that could be, let's say, normal. We have many approach, but I'm sure that our pro team will remove this, will increase this value much in the future. You have several approach in order to fix this type of problems.
Yes, this is not an issue that we see often in the cases, because there are many ways to work around this issue.
Yeah. Also, it's very important because you mentioned one thing very important, Thamires. It's about suppose to have 100 databases, and the end you have at least several threads manage the files, several threads manage the workers, several threads manage, let's say, the data, the connectivity, and then having 100 databases, you are going to assign a lot of resources in order to manage all these things, okay? So for two reasons, the idea to, let's say, to have different manage or think about other ways, you could have more databases in this type of situations, right?
Also, it's important to mention that there are limits per managed instance. For example, data max size and memory. So 100 databases, depending on those limits, may be already a lot. So you can check in the documentation the resources limits for the managed instance.
I think one limit it's about the limit about the bandwidth that you have for the transaction log, and also we have some limits in an instance level also, right?
Yeah, there is limit on I/O and memory and even the max size. So, for example, depending on the sizes of the database, they may not fit all 100 in one managed instance. So you may reach other limits before you reach the limit of the number of databases.
Yeah!